For modern gamers, it may be hard to appreciate that there was once a time when a new game announcement from Rare meant looking forward to what would surely be a classic game. The Nintendo 64 and Rare were a match made in heaven, and so when I read that they were making a sci-fi inspired third-person shooter, I knew it would be a day one pickup for me, and so began the 2-year or so wait until late 1999 when the game was finally released. During this time, the game unsurprisingly went through a number of changes. For those not in the know, Rare had 2 teams based inside of their renowned studios. The studio was set up this way, firstly to allow the steady flow of releases between the 2 teams, but also to put them in competition with one another. Jet Force Gemini was developed by the same team that made Blast Corps, and other talent was pooled to work on this new title. The lead programmer was Paul Mountain, who had worked on Diddy Kong Racing previously but was relatively new to the company. When recalling his memories of the game's inspiration, he states that the free-roaming nature and huge worlds of Mario 64 definitely influenced them, but at the same time they wanted to incorporate the classic wave shooter feel and the attacking cover feel of Quake. Adding to this, they also wanted to have the exploration and upgrades of Metroid and the themes of Star Wars, Dune and Alien. With the studio's very close ties with Nintendo, you perhaps have thought that Nintendo would have had a closer hand in helping form the game. Whilst naturally Nintendo did keep a close eye on the game, they were generally very positive with what they were seeing. Miyamoto perhaps made the biggest alteration to the game, and that was in its character design. Anyone who saw early shots of the game would have noticed the more cartoon-like main characters. Miyamoto, perhaps wanting to try and give the game a more mature feel, suggested changes which were quickly implemented, and so we were left with the final design of the characters that you see in this build of the game. So after only a couple of months of delays from its original expected release date, the game landed after some final bugs had been ironed out. What surprised me the most though was that unlike the previous releases by Rare, reviewers hadn't given this one near perfect scores. For the first time it seemed that a chink had been found in Rare's armour. The once untouchable studio who could do no wrong had finally released a game with some serious flaws and a difficulty which would irritate gamers to no end. But before we write off Jet Force Gemini, listen on as it's a game as fantastic as it is frustrating. The game should take you over 30 hours to complete on your first playthrough, as it has 15 worlds which are huge, and are also broken down into smaller sub-levels. Add to this a pseudo 2-player co-op mode and also a 4-person multiplayer mode, and you have a game with quite a lot of content and options. There are also over 15 weapons and items to use, in-game cutscenes, enhanced Dolby surround sound, and handily for modern TVs there's also a widescreen setting. The Rumble Pack is also fully supported, however the expansion pack is not. If you pick this game up on day one, you may have a box that states expansion pack support, but this was due to a mix-up, and so to rectify it, stickers were placed on some boxes to hide this. Whilst we're on the subject of the expansion pack, the rationale behind not using it was that Rare wanted everyone to be able to have the same experience of the game without alienating those who didn't have the expansion pack. They also felt comfortable with what they were able to achieve without it, but this leads to a big problem in my opinion, which I'll come to a little bit later on. But firstly, the basic story of the game is that you take control of the Jet Force Gemini team, as they attempt to defeat the evil leader Mizar and his horde of cronies and save the tribals, who are a weird Ewok-like native creature. You have 3 playable characters to choose from, and they all have their own unique skills, abilities and routes through the game. The game begins with the team's ship being attacked by Mizar's drones, which forces them to make an emergency exit and split up to tackle the invasion. Juno, who is the male hero, has the ability to walk on fire and lava. Vela, the female hero, has the ability to swim underwater, and Lupus, the canine hero, can hover for an extended period of time. In the well-crafted levels there will often be areas which you'll need to reach with specific characters. This instantly adds a considerable amount of time to each level, as you'll more often than not need to play through all of the levels with each of the 3 characters to fully complete them. That was the first criticism aimed at the game by reviewers. The second though would almost kill the game for many. You see, in each of the levels you must rescue tribals. They're the Ewok-like characters who are scattered throughout each level, and they make noises when you get closer to them. To complete the game, you must rescue all of the tribals in every level. This is not an optional requirement to get a better ending, this is something you must do in order to fully complete the game. What makes things more difficult is that the tribals are not just scattered around, many of them are hidden and sometimes in the most obscure and hard to find places. This adds some exploration to the game, but can also leave you sometimes searching huge levels to find just one last tribal. To make matters worse, your enemies will not just only try to kill you, but they'll also try to kill the tribals as you rescue them. They can even be placed in the crossfire of epic battles or be surrounded by explosive barrels. And so just because you found them, it doesn't mean that you can rescue them so easily. And of course, don't forget, if just one of them gets killed, then you may as well start the whole level over, as you need to save every single one of them in order to complete the game. But if you do restart the level because one has died, then all the enemies will respawn with full health and all unlocked doors are suddenly re-locked again, and so you'll need to wade through swarms of enemies over and over again. Add to this the requirement to collect items and spaceship parts, and the game quickly becomes very tedious and annoying. But in the same way that the game is frustrating, it's also terribly addictive. Just like classic arcade games of the 1980s, Jet Force Gemini frustrated you just enough to continue playing without pushing you over the edge to turn the game off. The intense and action-packed gameplay is a blessing, and unloading tons of awesome weapons into hordes of enemies is great fun, especially when they blow up into tiny pieces and scatter all over the ground. It does take some practice to do this though, as the controls are far from intuitive. The controls, I would say, are a blend between GoldenEye and Turok. You have no problem with most of the basic weapons and moves, but some of the more exotic weapons such as the sniper rifle are a pain to use, and no matter which control scheme you use, you'll never quite feel very comfortable with how to use them. Another slight gripe is that the characters do continue to move for a few steps even after you've stopped pushing the direction for them to move. Whilst this is more realistic due to the momentum the characters are moving with, in a game it takes a little getting used to, and there may be the odd time or two when you may fall off an edge after you've stopped wanting to move. Due to the amount of on-screen action and seemingly endless waves of enemies, the game at times suffers from some pretty heavy slowdown. I honestly believe this would have been non-existent if they have at least given the option to play the game with the expansion pack. And I could understand if the game was nearly complete when the decision was made not to use this, but it wasn't the case. Thankfully though, the graphics in the game are great, and you probably have expected nothing less from Rare. Each of the game's worlds feels and looks unique, and it makes travelling to a new planet exciting, as you want to explore what the new area has to offer. While the texture quality would by no means be described as high, the sheer variety alone is enough to keep you interested. The enemies also have some great attention to detail and animation, most notably when you blow them up. If you take them out with your standard weapons, they tend to fall to the ground, but make them explode, but pieces will fly all over the place. There are also some humorous touches, such as having to wipe out a group that have surrendered and the ability to collect their heads as tokens. The game proudly shows the Dolby Surround logo at the start of the game, and this is quite possibly one of the best sounding games on the console. If you have a surround sound system or a good soundbar, everything will sound razor sharp and crisp. Bullets will zip past you, and you can tell which direction enemy shots or explosions are coming from simply by listening carefully. For those hoping for a Grant Kirkhope soundtrack, you may be a little disappointed. The game was composed by Robin Beanland, Graham Norgate and Alistair Lindley, and while it sounds good, it rarely has those memorable tunes you sometimes associate with Rare. What we have here though is a score that's almost orchestra-like in its delivery. You have huge sweeping scales clearly drawn from the Star Wars films, and more subtle organic pieces of music in some levels where it feels more like something you'd have heard in Alien. If one thing's for sure though, the music fits the game perfectly, and it further brings the worlds alive with their unique atmospheres. Rounding things off, the game's AI must be commended. The drones are some of the smartest enemies that you'll come across on the system, and don't let the fact that they come in waves fool you. They don't run at you all guns blazing and are quite content to sit back or retreat to be able to take pot shots at you. Some enemies also require specific weapons to kill them, and so as you progress through the game you'll also have to think about what strategy you will take when you enter new areas or rooms. Now don't get me wrong, this isn't Rainbow Six or anything, but anyone thinking that they would just run through the level shooting at everything that moves may be in for a harder ride than they were perhaps expecting. As you blast your way through the world and the 5 incredible boss battles, you'll eventually complete the game. Along the way, it will have perhaps been one of the most frustrating titles you'll have played on the system. If you're playing it for the first time though, it can be easy to give up as the difficulty is quite high. But if you just push on a little further, you'll find a game which delivers a big payoff and a whole lot of bang for your buck. Now when I was younger, I remember being quite disappointed with this game. I got around halfway through it but let my frustrations get the better of me, and so I did stop playing it. And then in my early 20s I picked it up again and had the same experience, and so I swore that I was done with the game for good. In all honesty, I really wasn't looking forward to doing this review because of my past experiences with the game. But going back to it for the purposes of this review, I began to enjoy the game more than I expected. And so by the time the final credits rolled, I had regretted writing this game off in the past. It's action packed, hard as nails, and has that rare charm slapped all over it. So pick it up, play it, and if you don't like it, just keep playing. It's a game I wouldn't want anyone to miss out on playing. No, it's not Rare's greatest game on the console, but it is perhaps one of their most innovative and experimental. And so for today's topic of conversation, I want to know what games you've written off in the past, and then years later you've played them and actually enjoyed them. Can you think of any times when you've thought of a game was absolutely terrible, only to revisit either days, months, or even years later to find out that you had a newfound appreciation for it? As always, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and until next time.